Welcome to Pittsburgh Earth Days, the Dirt Podcast, featuring Grant Ervin, live from the Point Park University Center for Media Innovation. Here is your host, Grant Ervin.
Hello, and welcome to the next installment of the Dirt Podcast. I'm your host, Grant Ervin, coming to you, kind of sort of live, but from the Point Park studio here in downtown Pittsburgh in the Center for Media Innovation. It's a new year, 2022, and so we're excited to start this new year off with CEO of Duquesne Light Company, Kevin Walker. Kevin, how are you today?
I'm very good, Grant. Thanks for having me.
Hey, great to be here, and Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you.
Did you have a good holiday season?
I did. Took all the precautions with travel, seeing my family down south, and got back safe. I think my nose is a little sore from all the testing along the way, but we made it fine. So how about yourself?
That's great. I had a great holiday season. Took some time off, spent some time with the kids and family and all that sort of stuff. Cooked a lot.
Oh,
that was kind of my.
What's your specialty?
My specialty? Oh boy, let's see here. What did I come up with? A couple of good soups.
Oh,
yeah.
Time for soup, as cold as it is outside right now.
It is soup season. So I had a really great broccoli cheddar that was pretty terrific. My kids like that one, and then I've been working with ramen. That's been the new thing coming out of my kitchen.
Well, you'll have to slide me those recipes. We like to cook in our spare time.
Nice.
Not a lot, but when we get the spare time, we like to cook. So I'd love to pick up some of those good recipes.
All right. I'm going to put you on my list then.
All right, great.
Quick plug for the ramen. It's kind of fun, like I don't know if you were a ramen guy in college and all, but to do it as an adult and start to put all the different like flavor layerings in. That was
a little fancy, huh?
Yeah, it's like fancy ramen. So it's not like your freshman year in college.
That's right.
But, it's taking it up a notch.
Good.
So that was kind of my highlights over the holiday.
That's great.
But it's great to see you. Great to have you here in the studio here at Point Park. Maybe if we start out with listeners, really interested in your background. So tell us a little bit about Kevin Walker before Duquesne Light.
Yeah, well, let me go all the way back to college days. I'm a West Point graduate, which is important to me. I was proud of my service to the country. Served for about 6.5 years.
The long gray line.
Long gray line, yeah, long gray line. 6.5 years in the military, was in the first Gulf War. And then I came to the utility space from the military, to work for Con Edison in New York City. I've worked for 6 different utility companies now. I think I have some sort of record. But it's been great because I've learned so much along the way. Small markets, large markets, rural, urban, and even international. I worked for Iberdrola, the Spanish energy giant, for a long time. My most recent utility gig was out in California, in Southern California, Edison, in the LA area.
Okay.
And I came from there to here, working for Duquesne Light. Came in as the chief operating officer, and now I'm the CEO of the company.
Awesome. Congratulations. And before I stopped, thank you for your service also.
Oh, thank you.
Very important for all of us. And my brother's a West Point grad. We've talked about this a little bit.
That's
so
right.
I've taken a couple trips up the Hudson, as they say.
Yeah, yeah. I always say it's a beautiful place after you get out of the 4 years you've been there. It was kind of a blur for the 4 years, but after that, I recognize how beautiful it is, and the history and all of that there is just pretty impressive.
I remember when I took my tour up there when I was in high school, my dad, made sure we went in the fall. It's just idyllic.
It's kind of magical there.
It is a magical space.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. Well, tell me, what are some of the continuity or the threads that run through your utility experience? So being in rural and urban and international, that has to be, is it more the same or different, or talk a little bit about that?
I think there's a lot more similarities than there are differences.
Okay.
Like, for instance, all things are local. Regardless of, when I worked for the huge Spanish energy giant that had operations in Brazil and Mexico and the U.S. and obviously Spain and other places, everything that we did, though, was focused on our local communities and our local markets. And so I love being here in Pittsburgh. We serve Allegheny County and Beaver County, but the Pittsburgh region at large is really something that's very intimate to us. I mean, our neighbors, our friends are also our customers and our coworkers. And so I like that closeness. So even though we work for giant companies, that local feel and that local focus is really important.
Do you now, when people know that you work for the utility, do you always get get those questions.
I know this is question like the doctors always, hey, my elbow
I got
hurts,
this
right?
Or the shoulder, or my lights are flickering.
Exactly.
What should I do about that?
I do, and I have to cut it off at some point. Like, okay, it's like no more questions around the utility. But I do the same thing. If I find out somebody's a car mechanic, it's like, oh, I heard this really weird clanking
rattle
in my car. So it's just occupational hazards. But the good thing is that prior to me, Duquesne Light has a very good reputation in the community. And mostly people are talking very favorably. When we have outages, people feel like we're responsive, and we tell them the cause, and we try to prevent this. So I think inheriting an organization with good people and a good reputation makes it easy for me. Not to say that we're perfect, but there's lots of positive energy in the community.
And pun intended.
Yes, exactly.
And did your communications people tell you to throw?
No, it's kind of natural.
It's part of the business.
It's in the DNA now. So
are there differences then too? Is there things that you have found, whether it's in SoCal, Addison?
There are some differences, and really, from a regulated utility standpoint, it's the pace of change. Mm-hmm. Change is inevitably happening everywhere. Mm-hmm. There's leaders like in California. Some people would say that they're going too fast, too far. You would think an economy like that, with all the technology and the capabilities and the resources and all that stuff, shouldn't have rolling blackouts in 2021, but they do. Part of that is because of how far and how fast they're going. But there are some good things to pull from that. And so it's just a matter of the pace of change that's happening at different stages around those places. But the change is coming. So you can learn a lot from those places that are moving faster.
What causes that difference in pace? Is it policy, or is it leadership?
It's kind of all the above. Certainly policy, regulatory, and legislative policy. Customers, I love to start with customers, because the customers influence all of that. So you could imagine if there's a bunch of customers who want choice, that's going to happen faster in those jurisdictions than where the customers don't, are either silent or don't want it. So if you believe that policymakers and regulators are instruments to do the public's will, then it all starts with the public, and in our case, that's the customers and people who live and work in Pittsburgh.
Interesting. For listeners who are kind of new to the show and maybe new to the region, could you talk a little bit about Duquesne Light, and because it's more than just electricity.
Sure,
right?
sure, yeah. So we're 1,700 strong employees, and our main business is our regulated utility. So we have the transmission and distribution part of the business. We don't generate anymore. We used to be vertically integrated where we had generation. That was unbundled here in Pennsylvania. So we don't own our generation. We do purchase generation on behalf of customers who don't purchase it on their own. And then we transport that generation, so those electrons, from the source through our transmission system, through the distribution system, to the homes or to the businesses. So that's our core business. We also have two other businesses, 10, the efficiency network, and as the name indicates, it's an efficiency business that helps customers figure out efficiency. And the great thing is that we actually just won a lighting contract in the city of Pittsburgh. So we're really excited about that. And if you think about the efficiency component of that, but there's a safety component of it as well. There's a economic development component of changing street lighting, and there's a light pollution correction issues. So there's a lot of win-win scenarios for that. So we're super excited that 10 won that contract and are going to be able to lean in and deliver on that for the city. And then we have a communications business, DQE Comms, which does, as again the name indicates, telecommunications, cable communications. We're thinking about doing communications into the home now, which is another area for us. So really a diverse array of products and services that we offer to our customers.
And it's interesting, and it's, even though you talk about the vertically integrated nature of generation, when you look at efficiency and telecom, that's a new type of vertical integration, isn't it?
Oh,
you
absolutely.
Start to think about smart cities technologies,
That's
and
right.
IoT technologies.
That's right.
How does that play out in some of the decision making that you have to make as a chief executive.
Yeah, it's great to have DQE Comms as part of our family because they remind us of that. Like, everything that you do rides on the backbone of some kind of some communications piece, right? Like you can't, talk to these electronic devices unless you have a strong communications network. And so it is great to be able to think about all those aspects, and it's super important. And then, if you think about the dollars that are coming from the federal government through the infrastructure law, all of these areas are ripe for some huge advancements, which is great.
It's kind of interesting when you talk about that. I remember I had the privilege of working on the smart city strategy for the city back in 2016, and learning about DQE communications. I have more of an energy background than a telecom or ICT background, but the ubiquitous nature of that network, and whether it was luck or foresight or a little bit of both, having that all across the region is a huge advantage for, the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, most utility companies had a communications arm because they used it for their own kind of internal use.
Right.
And then as regulations changed, they were allowed to use that that backbone that was not at capacity for commercial use. So they started marketing that. And the fact that you had everything in the ground, you had additional capacity, it made a low entry barrier for people to access that. Once you build that all out, and now you're building new stuff, it becomes a different game, really, because it's just another level of intensity as far as dollars and resources and even land rights and all the other stuff. So most utilities are moving beyond that footprint that was such a competitive advantage to those very open-ended spaces.
What are some of those things that are starting to come out? I guess two things that come to my mind with that. One is outages and mitigating kind of risk as a result of weather events.
Yeah.
And then the other is just intelligence that can be built into the system. What does that mean for the customer? Like how does having that play out for the residential customer or the industrial customer across the region?
Yeah, I believe that, and the way I position it with my folks is think about cable, because everybody can identify with cable.
Yeah.
I have 8-year-old twins, as you may recall, and when I didn't have 8-year-old twins, I only needed a basic package in sports. That was it. I didn't need the Disney Channel. I didn't need any of that kind of stuff. That now I need everything that they can offer, because they've got to access the Mandalorian, and they've got to access all this other stuff. So I'm one of those kinds of customers who need it all, and I'm willing to pay for it.
Yeah.
There's other customers and different points in my life where I don't even watch TV, so I don't need anything. I probably need it on a as I need basis, right? I don't need it. So thinking about customer needs and profiles, some customers want to take advantage of all the technology, all the resiliency that you can provide. That comes at a cost. There's others who are like, look, I'm all about price sensitivity. Give me the cheapest thing you can give me, and if I have reset my clocks 3 or 5 times a week, I'm happy to do that.
Sure.
And everything in between. So our job is to figure out what our customers want, and to give them specifically what they need at a price point that they believe is a value-driven price, right?
Interesting.
And that's different for utilities, because we've been on-off switches. Either you pay the tariff or you don't pay the tariff. I think there's this nuance now that our customers, both residential and commercial, will want us to see us step up to the plate, right?
Does that start to change the types of products and services that the utility provides?
Absolutely, and it should. If we're really going to be responsive to our customers' needs, and what happens is if we're not responsive to the customer needs, then they'll go get it from somewhere else, right? They'll find a market participant that offers this thing, and slowly it erodes both the partnership that utilities have with our customers, because we're a trusted agent just naturally, because we've been here a long time. We're going to be here. We're not going anywhere. We're tied to Pittsburgh. So customers have that trust with us. But if we can't deliver what they need, then they're going to find somewhere else, and that erodes the relationship. So our job is to understand what customers want, provide that value, and keep that trusted energy partner relationship with them.
That's amazing. What are some of the things that you have seen? You've been in Chief Operating Officer position, and now the CEO. What are some of the differences in terms of moving from, one C-suite office to the top C-suite office?
Most people have, looking at any role from afar, it looks very different than being in the role. And so I think for years I thought, that CEO job, I could do that. That's pretty,
You just sign papers.
You sign papers and you tell everybody else what to do.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't work that way. And now that I'm in the role, I see, each month I go by and know what I didn't know the month before. And the best thing is that I have to rely on my team, who's very seasoned. They're very passionate about their work. They love Pittsburgh. They have a future tilt to try to think about where we need to be in the future, and it's really reliance on and motivating teams to be the best that they can be. It's much more soft skills than it is hard skills. My engineering and my MBA don't come in handy every day. Most of the time, it's about people issues and wrestling through thorny issues that don't have a bright line answer. It's not that on off. It's really nuance. So I'm learning to be more nuanced, more patient, and more reliant on my team.
What is the difference, I guess? I mean, when you start to get down to like you have 8-year-old twins and they're asked, Dad, what do you do?
Yeah.
What is the difference, I guess, from operations, which you have a huge purview in terms of what's going on in the company, versus the chief executive role?
Yeah, I would say operations is very much more tactical, much more real time, and much more quite frankly, risk averse, right? We don't, the electrons have to flow like we expect them to flow every time. And I always use the ATM example. If I go to the ATM and I push $40 and I get 39, I'm going to be pretty upset. If I get 41, I might not be upset too much, right?
Tell anybody about that,
But the operation stuff has to happen the same way, predictably every time, and so that means a lot of rigor, a lot of checks and double checks and triple checks, and that kind of scrutiny that have a very direct cause and effect piece. The wild card is climate change because you can build a system, but you can't ever build it robust enough to withstand any kind of weather event. So the question is, sensitivity. How much do you want to invest to make it? How robust do you want to make it?
Right.
On this side, I deal with a lot of ambiguities and nuances, and no bright line answer, and so it's a lot about pros and cons and points and counterpoints, and when you make a decision, you just got to keep going forward, and hopefully you don't have to reverse that decision.
Yeah. How is just an interesting question with your background from the military academy? How is that kind of leadership training and that ethos that you gain at a place like West Point? How does that translate into the chief executive role?
It comes in handy, especially in ambiguity and crisis and things like that, because I think what you're taught at the academy, or any even in the military, not even the academy, but the military, is to really sort through all of the inputs that you're getting and focus on the things that are critical. Yeah. Right. So things that are noise, you kind of have a tendency to kind of push off to the side. So think about you're on a battlefield, and there's enemy fire coming from you from another direction. Directly to the left, to the right, there's cows and sheep, and there's a building on fire, and all this. You're going to focus on that fire.
Where the fire's coming from.
You. Right. You're not going to focus on the other stuff, even though it's interesting and maybe needs your attention at some point. That enemy fire is where you need to be focused. So it allows you to sift through those things that are kind of noise or not urgent for today. Right. And focus on the things that are important, right?
Know the cows are there.
That's right. Know they're there, and you might have to come back to them at some point. Right. You might have somebody else watch the cows. Keep an eye on the cows while I'm focused on this. But ultimately, it allows you to focus on the things that really matter, and start moving the ball from that point.
That's interesting. And you were an artillery guy, is that right?
Yes. I usually say what when people ask me that question, but yes, my hearing is fine.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah, I was an artillery guy, and luckily I maintained my hearing.
Congratulations on that. There's I had an advisor in undergraduate who is a tank gunner, and he had tanker's ear. And that was always like both part of like the joke and the connection with him was like he's I hear what I want to hear. Yeah, that was always his line.
That's right.
So kind of focusing in on that target has to have been really difficult in the sense that you came into the leadership role in the middle of the pandemic. Is that right?
Yeah. So I moved across from California. My family, 2 dogs, 2 8-year-olds, 2 adults, 2 cars, and a lot of stuff. Yeah. In the middle of the pandemic, and we had no idea if there was going to be food along the way.
This is like March of 20.
March of 20. Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, the end of March, almost April. I started April 1 was my first day. So that was an interesting experience. And that's where talk about my military experience, that came in handy because this saying, your head was on a swivel. I was looking at everything. I was prepared for everything.
Everybody was
prepared. Yeah, I mean, the adrenaline was running, and I think
did you get out of the rest stop and have a rucksack?
I had a virtual one. I was really
virtual
thinking
rucksack.
I was in kind of this combat environment.
Your wife was like, Kevin, put that down.
Protect my family and all, but yeah, and when I got to Pittsburgh, I slept for 3 days because I was just after being able to decompress and okay, now everything's fine. I'm here. But that was quite an adventure. And then starting with a company virtually. And this is where, again, I have to say, it's Pittsburghers, it's Duquesne Light. They were willing to accept a total stranger who they never met in person, who they couldn't really look in the eye and feel your hand shake. I mean, all those things that are intangibles that build a trust level, they were willing to give me that trust without having that happen. And I am forever grateful for that. And I believe that has something to do with the DNA of the people. I've worked in other places. I told you I worked at 6 different utilities. They'll go nameless, but unless you had, been there for 20 years, unless they knew all these all this stuff about you and could really get a personal up and close, they just wouldn't trust you. And, in a pandemic, that means you never gain the trust until the pandemic's over, which is, we don't know when that's going to be.
We don't know when that is, right?
Yeah, so I'm very fortunate and grateful that, the DNA in the company and in this region was much more open and welcoming.
Have you tried what are some of the things you've done, I guess, to help build that trust and continue that type of culture, I guess? Because you're right, there's, you use the word intangibles, which I think is really important in this sense. You get into a hairy situation and you have that trust, whether it's you've worked with somebody for a long time or the playing field, battlefield, et cetera, when you effectively parachuted in, right?
Yeah.
And so, how has that been to kind of build that trust of the team, particularly in a leadership role? What are some of the examples?
Yeah, it's been intentional. Having been the new guy at 6 different places, I've got it wrong more than I've gotten it right, but near the end, I've gotten it right. And I know that's got to be one of those things that's enemy fire that you need to focus on.
Sure.
So being intentional about, what's the culture in this organization, in this community? What are the things that give you credibility and that help build that trust? And I don't know that through my brain, so I ask people hey, I'm a new guy. The old show Columbo, I love that because if anybody ever watched that show,
Peter Falk fan.
Yeah, he was the most bumbling, clueless person for the first 95% of the show, and then the last 5% he's oh, by the way, and he's got all the answers, right? But it's something to asking questions and being genuine about wanting to hear the answer that most people will open up and tell you. So I mean, I had those frank discussions with people that said hey, I'm a new guy here. I want to be successful. I want to be able to help the team. Mm-hmm. What advice would you give me? What tips would you give me?
Yeah.
And I got some really great advice on what was important to the community, how things translate. You might think that you're sending this message when you do this, but it actually sends this other message and vice versa. I learned that I have to know a lot about the sports teams here locally, that kind of stuff. So it was very helpful to just, listen and ask questions initially and then to act on that stuff.
And to act on that information.
Yeah.
That's really important. So, in the midst of a pandemic, you mentioned a lot of this already in the conversation, but there's a lot of change going on in the industry of energy.
Yeah.
And so it's always a dynamic kind of place, but I think, have you sensed that has accelerated in recent years, or is that just me kind of, as a new guy in the space, kind of observing that?
No, I absolutely feel like it has. I mean, I've been in the industry for 30 years now. It's amazing to say that. And at the beginning of my career, most utilities were vertically integrated, so everybody owned their generation.
Very predictable.
Nobody was talking about distributed energy resources. Really, it was kind of an exotic thing that was super expensive. Nobody was talking about solar. I mean, there's all of the stuff now that it's not a matter of if, it's how we integrate it, because it's actually available. The technology's there. There's a commercial viability. All those things are there. Enter in climate change. We hadn't been talking about climate climate change at all and 30 years ago, at least not in the circles I was in. Now, folks are trying to wrestle with, regardless of, and sometimes it's, terms are supercharged with energy. So something's happening in the climate.
Another pun drop.
Yeah.
Just for Ashley
you're
in
really,
the control
room.
Really
picking up on this stuff, so, right?
Ashley,
I have a bug in my ear. She's telling me. Something's happening in the climate that things are, worse, and we can verify that through science. I mean, when I first got here, we had a storm. I think we had like 70-mile-an-hour winds clocked at the airport, at Pittsburgh Airport, which we'd never had clocked there before. So something's happening there. We weren't talking about this stuff 30 years ago in the circles I was in. So there's lots of change. And then, again, it's uneven. We have 50 states, and there's 50 different regulatory regimes and legislatures and all that stuff. So having been in New York City, where they had this reforming the energy vision, which was an early adopter of moving to cleaner and greener.
This is with Con Ed and New York City.
Yep.
Sure.
And then being in California, where they're doing all the things that they're doing out of there, I've gotten to be in those environments where those things are happening. So coming here to Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh, it's informed by a lot of that stuff, and I know what's possible, and also know the things to watch out for to make sure that we don't through our exuberance get to a place where we're getting stuck.
Is that something that you think is on the horizon from Duquesne Light? Like, I've had the ability to build a climate plan within the city of Pittsburgh. Is that something that the utility is going to move towards?
Oh, absolutely.
In terms of its own individual plan, both from a adaptation standpoint, like the 70-mile-per-hour winds that you're talking about, but also from a mitigation standpoint. There's a lot of projects I want to talk about. So you're kind of on that path already. But what does that look like from a strategic level? What does the battlefield look like?
Yeah, I mean, so you're thinking a couple things. And, ESG, I would start with that. Obviously, we are keenly aware of our role in ESG for our region, for our own company. You well know we have equity investors who are international investors, and so they bring their experiences from other countries that are much further ahead on this stuff than we are. Embedded in our ESG is community advancement for all the communities, and DE&I efforts are embedded in there, along with governance and environmental issues. We look at that very seriously, and our debt investors, so people we get bonds purchases from, are also interested in how we're doing from an ESG standpoint. So all roads lead to us being able to articulate what we're doing, why we're doing it, what the impacts are going to be, and then holding ourselves accountable as we move down that line. So we are moving on that path as a company, and I'm excited because a lot of things we already have in place, so it's not brand new stuff, and there's some things that we want to build into our portfolio.
In terms of the ESG, and for new listeners to the show, ESG, we call that environmental social governance.
Yes,
has been really at the vanguard of corporate conversations, I'd say, in the last 2 years, maybe 3, but it's coming fast.
Yeah.
And what are some of the things that you are doing to help both prepare, but also, like you said, acknowledge a lot of existing things that are already happening within the utility?
Yeah. We we just hired someone, I'm happy to say, Christine Waller, who's going to help lead our ESG work, and she's she would blush at this, but I consider her an expert at ESG, and she's going to help us move down that path. We also are leveraging, again, our investors who have a lot of experience with that, and our bondholders are giving us good advice. So what that means is, again, we need to be able to basically report on those areas, what we're doing, what we've done, and what we're planning on doing. So let me say DE&I for an example, because that's near and dear to my heart. We released our
maybe
first...
tell folks DE&I.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Yeah, so sorry, you can take the boy out of the acronyms, but you can't take the acronyms out of the boy, I guess.
For sure.
We love that in the utility industry, so I apologize for that. We released our first DE&I report. I think it's puts a stake in the ground and say, here's where we're starting from, and here's where we want to go aspirationally. We have much, much more work to do, so I'm not claiming victory and waving the flag yet. But being able to go on a record and then hold ourselves accountable and allow others to hold us accountable for our performance in that area is a milestone step for us, and we're pretty proud of what we've been able to accomplish there. because we are energy, we're all about the electrification of things because everything can be electrified. It can be a cleaner, cheaper, greener, and create more benefits for the economy and jobs and all those kinds of things on a local basis that are everything that we're about. So we, it's self-serving, but it's also good for good public policy. It's good for the climate. It's good for our customers and our communities. Like the electrification of things is super important, and so electric vehicles, for instance, is a good approach. And when we think about this for all constituents, a lot of people will say, well, people who are living at or below the poverty level don't own their own cars, or certainly can't afford the premium that they would have to pay for an electric vehicle. We say, there's an app for that. So what you do is you have public transportation that's electrified, and we're happy to have worked with the Port Authority to have a couple of buses that are electrified. So while you can't access it through your own vehicle, you can ride an electrified bus, which means that you're benefiting and accessing electric vehicles.
Let's dive into that a little bit deeper. So a couple weeks ago, you signed on for CEOs for Electrification.
That's right.
With a great organization, Rewiring America.
Yep.
Maybe why'd you sign on?
Start
with a real basic question.
Well, it's a very compelling story, and it's very aligned with what we're doing at DLC, which is, we think that electrification is the way to go for many reasons. Again, I kind of list them off really fast, but clearly there's an environmental impact. Clearly there's an efficiency impact. There's a cost and economic impact. There's jobs. There's all these kind of benefits that go along with it, right? So it's kind of a no-brainer, and it's our space. Like we can help. We can't help advance. A new flavored donut. That's not our thing. But what our thing is energy, and so
you can electrify the oven that makes the donut.
There we go.
Right?
Absolutely, we can do that. And so I feel like it's just really aligned with our strategy, with our DNA, with the things that we can help advance. I know that the city is working on that. I took the pledge for the CEOs, but the mayor took the pledge for the mayors, and that was
Pittsburgh was the first.
Because I think you got other people to join, right?
Yeah, we got Columbus, Dayton, Huntington, all of our Marshall Plan for Middle America mayors, Mayor Brown and Youngstown.
Yeah. So let me ask you why you signed on to it.
So for me, electrification, and I'm becoming a bit of an acolyte with Saul Griffith and Ari Matuziak and Alex Lasky.
I didn't say that. Alex Lasky is a good friend of mine, and anything that Alex is doing, I want to be a part of. So.
We'll give a quick plug for Alex and his work. We had started to have a conversation with them in probably early 2021. And, one of the things that I started to recognize was from a climate standpoint here in the city, in order for us to make the next leap in terms of advancement of climate action, it's going to require massive electrification. And so we've seen that at an operational scale, both with our fleet as well as with our facilities, that the current system has a lot of limitations to it in terms of just, how you outfit a building or how you outfit vehicles. And so unless you make that transition from the internal combustion engine or fossil fuel heating systems, you're not going to be able to get the emissions reductions or the economic benefit that goes alongside of it. And so as we started to look at those numbers, the thing that also became evident was the opportunity for the region is just transformational when we start to think about both the amount of emissions reductions, but also the job creation benefits. So when we look across the 4 states that we've worked on as part of some of those mayors that I just talked about, the decarbonization and shift to clean energy systems can create upwards of 400,000 jobs.
That's
and
awesome.
This same region can lose 100,000 jobs over that same 10-year period. So the upside is so huge in terms of air quality benefits, health benefits. It was kind of a natural decision for us.
Yeah, it's great, and I applaud the city for taking that approach. It's really important, and I know that this city is being recognized as a success story. You think about the history our history has been very positive, but not necessarily so kind to the environment. But we're being heralded now as a success story. So much so that those, the next year, I think we're having the
Clean Energy Ministerial
Ministry is coming here, and the way that's being.
We're gonna have to get tickets for that, you and I.
I might know someone that can help me with that.
It's a front row seat.
But it's impressive, the transformation.
One of the things, as a new person to Pittsburgh, I'd suggest take a look at. There's a guy at Carnegie Mellon. His name's Joel Tarr. Mm-hmm. He's in the history department, and so he's a local Pittsburgh historian. But one of the things that he's looked at is the history of energy, and this was one of the other things that kind of led us up to that decision. Was he and a couple of his research fellows did an analysis of earlier transitions, and so wood to coal to gas, and ultimately what led into them, and the timeline it took to make that happen was really short, or relatively short, I should say. Like kind of a decade period in terms of outfitting all the homes from coal boilers to gas boilers. And so we're in that same type of transition period right now, I think, in terms of going back to what you were talking about with the ICT network and smart grid technologies, that we have a lot of the foundations. It's just a matter of kind of adopting the in-building technologies or the in-vehicle technologies.
Yeah, I love history. Maybe it's a part of my West Point experiences, and history is really important. And Duquesne Light was built on, very history of innovation, Westinghouse. In fact,
nuclear reactors.
It's all kind of started here, and we built on that innovation. So that part of our history is in our DNA as well, that we like to innovate and create, and so I think this is just right on par with what we're all about in this region.
It's interesting because in that space, another quick plug is a guy, another mentor of mine, Jay Apt, APT at Carnegie Mellon, has also looked at, a lot of those kind of historical transitions, and he'd be a good guy for you to connect with.
Great.
Quick plug for both Joel and Jay at Carnegie Mellon.
Yeah.
But you guys hosted an event with the Scott Institute for Energy a couple of weeks ago we mentioned Alex Lasky on electrification. It was a fascinating conversation, but my question to you is, we're going to have to work at both ends, right? Like at the household level, partners convincing one another to, transition boilers and heaters to heat pumps and electric ranges and things like that. But we're also going to have to work at the macro scale too. What does that look like from a utility perspective? Like, how do we help at the household customer level, but how do we also build the infrastructure to kind of make that household decision possible?
Yeah, I think it goes to the relationship that we build with our customers, and that way that we are a trusted partner, so we can actually go to them and say, hey, you know what, you have a gas boiler. I loved Alex's example of, the boiler breaks and somebody wants to take a shower, and they can just replace in kind, have somebody come out and take the thing out and put it back in, or they can take the time to rewire the system so that they can accommodate an electric boiler that would ultimately over time save them money and all the other stuff. The question is, in that moment when they're sitting around the table and somebody needs a hot shower, what are they going to decide? And most people will decide for the expedient thing of just replacing in kind. So now they've lost the opportunity for another 10 or 15 or 20 years, however long that boiler lasts, to upgrade and become electrified. So we can have that discussion in advance of that with our customers and give them some information. We can talk to actual contractors to make sure that they are also promoting these things. So we can help the ecosystem be aligned to help the customer make the total cost of ownership decision versus the expedient one at the moment. So that's, to me, at the point of sale or the decision maker around the kitchen table. And then on the macro basis, to your point, it's policies, it's tariffs, it's incentives, it's all those things that we can do at a state and local level to make it easier for people to make those decisions.
You had an interesting idea. I'm going to at least credit you with it.
Okay, if it's a good one, I'll take it.
I think it was a good one. With the idea of starting at the box, like, what would that look like? Is that a policy decision within the PUC to get everybody's electrical box ready for all the electrical appliances, the electric vehicle? I just went through rewiring my house because I threw down the gauntlet, and my wife was like, well, then you deal with it. And so we went through the energy audit, which ultimately we had knob and tube wiring, which in order to put insulation in, we had to take out all the new knob and tube wiring. And now I'm like, after you said this, like, do I have to upgrade I think I have to upgrade my box. To create that space for more electrons to come into the home.
Right.
What would that look like at scale?
Yeah, I think the easiest thing would be building codes, right? Is to say like every new, and we've heard
new
this breaking
units
out all over the place that in New York City, which I was talking about a couple of weeks ago, where they said, okay, no new gas that they're going to put into new buildings. I think that's me. No new gas that they're putting into the buildings, and I think. You don't have to go that far,
right?
But I think you can say, all right, we're going to make sure that these boxes are electric ready, right?
Yeah.
So let's make sure that we don't just build to the size and build to what we have today, but make sure they're ready to take this on. So that'll slowly over time allow us to accommodate. You still have to get, most of us
still got to make the choice.
You still have to retrofit, and you still have to make the choice at the time. But at least that makes it easier because it's already there. It's one step that's already taken out of the equation.
Interesting. Yeah, it's one of those things. Like we just did the EV readiness code at the city for all of our facilities, 300 plus facilities. Anytime they undergo a major retrofit, they need to have the box. They need to be ready to take on electric vehicle charging units, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So doing that at the residential scale, that's what you're saying is like the next generation to make that happen.
I think so. And then again, if you make it like a easy button for most customers, if you can say, all right, I want it or I don't want it. Not like I want it and now I have to pick, one of these 4 things and then pick on these 6 or 7 other things. It's too complicated. So the more that contractors, utilities, buildings codes can make it easy, so it's just a one push and it's done. That will help customers make the choice, I think.
Yeah, that's awesome. We just had, just to take that down to the kind of the project level, we have a number of projects, there's a number of projects that are occurring here in the city of Pittsburgh with, the Duquesne Light team, which we're super appreciative of them. And so shout out to Liz Cook and Lindsay Baxter and Sarah Lexiak.
That's part of that great team, I tell you, that they really have kept me in the right place. So.
They're really, not only are they just fabulous people that know the region, but they're just really good at understanding the challenges. And for us at the city of Pittsburgh, as we've worked to implement a lot of these different aspects of our climate plan, they've just been hand in hand with us from the strategy to understanding the growing pains, of which there's been a couple,
maybe a few,
here and there, for sure. Which is, I want to kind of get into that in a second, but also like understanding what the future could bring, and so just really appreciative of all their work. Those hiccups that come along the way, those growing pains. Just to pick on one, because it's now a successful project because we cut the ribbon last week, was the 2nd Avenue EV charging hub. Yeah. And so, those lessons, I think, will ultimately help shorten the implementation on the next one. But how do we continue to kind of apply that, I guess, in terms of, here we put 32 charging units in, and it's going to help service a fleet of about 70 vehicles at the end of 2022. How do we kind of shorten those learning curves? Like, what are some of the ways that we can do that?
Yeah. So this goes to, and I guess the term we're using internally, and this is not a term we coined, but customer centricity is being able to focus on the customer. We have reorganized internally to Duquesne Light to be more responsive, to make sure that we can avoid it in the first case, but if we can't avoid them, we can resolve them much quicker than we do today. And so we have a team that's focused on doing just that. We also, thinking about our culture and things we want to introduce or strengthen our culture. We have this term called learning lens. So everything is an opportunity, and so you should look at everything with a learning lens. So
Very
this
important.
Example, we're all over it to say, what are the lessons learned so we can shorten, make it easier, less involved. And I think as we do those things, we will show up better and better for our customers. And then again, we'll earn that treasured title of trusted energy partner. So that's what we're trying to do.
That's a quick plug for that. It would be great to walk through that project, not just for our benefit, but because I told my team something very similar, which is like, we're gonna nobody's done this before. It's like nobody has built an electric vehicle charging hub in southwestern Pennsylvania, so it's not going to happen fast. It's not going to come in on time, under budget, those sorts of things. So, and that's one of the things that I've appreciated from our leadership, is the ability to continue to pursue these objectives because they're the right thing to do. Right. And so that you're going to stumble and you're going to fall, but you're going to ultimately learn and adapt. Just, it would be great to kind of walk through something like that.
Yeah, we should. And part of that learning is making sure we get the customer's perspective, in this case, the city's perspective. And so we should be involving you in that to say, hey, what do you think we could have done differently? And maybe we can share some things with you. Make it easy on our side. And we have the capability and experience of doing this. We do it after every storm. We know how to do after action review, or military, same thing. We used to always, after we did drills and training and exercise, like, okay, what went well, what can we do better, what do we, and you just get continually better as you go along. So this is not foreign. It's just different when we think about a project and a program with a customer for us.
We've talked about this a little bit here. Weather. Weather is, and particularly for a company that T&D, or transmission and distribution, is so important to your business. What have you seen just in your short time here? Like, we talked about the changing weather, the impacts of climate, et cetera, both from the line person point of view and people out in the field, but also from leadership. 70-mile-per-hour winds at the airport, torrential downpours that dump 3-4 inches of rain.
I was going to say, in our region, the winds are bad for the system, but we also have, with our reliefs and all that we have in our region, water is not our friend either when it happens really fast. Right? So we have seen more of that. We've seen more heating days, the degree days. So we've had more heat for a longer period of time in this region. So think about a system that was built for, mostly coal and a little bit of heat, and we're having more heat than we have. Right. And so the system is reacting differently. Texas had just the opposite. They build the system for heat. Now they're getting more cold than they ever have had. And, they had a crisis when it got to be extreme. So, again, something's happening. You can pick whatever word you want, term you want. But the weather is different. We have to respond to it and try to get ahead of it. And so, for instance, one of the things in our planning, we're always planning. That's the good thing about being a utility. We're looking 30, 40 years out on investments and things like that. And so part of our planning, we could look at a 10-year past horizon to say, okay, what's going to predict the future? What we're doing is shortening that time frame, because if you look at 10 years,
shorter
it dilutes. It dilutes what you've seen in the last 5 years, right? The last 5 years have not been the same as the last 10 years. So if we look at 10 years, we get a false sense of, we're okay. If you look at 5 years, you're like, wow, if that trend continues, there's a lot more for us to do. So we're trying to take a very conservative approach.
Does that impact both, or I know it does, so let me say, how does that impact both technology as well as the deployment of human capital?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we try to think of these things, people, process, and technology. All three of those things have to be aligned to really be successful. And I think oftentimes, if you over-rely on people without the process and technology, people are fallible. Technology is fallible. So if you only rely on the technology without a human check somehow, you miss that. And then the last thing that wraps it all around is the process, right? I mean, you could have processes that just make it so labor intensive and so cost intensive because your process needs to be reworked. If you can take out some of those steps and make it more streamlined, then your people and your technology work much better and seamlessly together. So we're thinking everything we do, let's make sure that we're considering all three of those aspects. The same about being more resilient to climate changes. Yeah,
that's awesome. Just in the last couple minutes that we have here with you, Kevin, I'd be real interested, to talk a little bit about, since it's our first show of the new year, and we're only a couple days in here. What do you see as kind of the trends that'll start to take shape in 2022, both for utility but also for the energy industry, I think, and here in Pittsburgh? What are some of the things that you have on the horizon, as well as things that you're keeping your eye on?
Yeah, I would say, and I'll start where we just ended, is resiliency. I think the customer is going to expect us to be more responsive to the change in climate and have a system that's more resilient. And so as we design that, I mean, at the cheapest cost possible, let's add that to it too, right? Because we wouldn't build something that's overbuilt and people can't afford it. So it's got to be cost effective for the resiliency that we build. So that's an expectation, and we are working on that today. The other expectation is to have the ability to get their energy sources both locally to say, I want all green power coming through your lines to me. I want to self-generate. I want to be able to monetize my self-generation, in the marketplace. Like basically all this choice and all the machinations that allow customers to decide where they get their power, when they get it, how much it costs, and all those things. While at the same time, it can't break the system. Like it needs to harmoniously work together. When the sun's not shining, I still want power. When the wind's not blowing, I still want power. When I'm having maintenance done to my equipment at home, I still want power. So how do we, as the utility, either provide that or facilitate that as the choreographer of this whole thing, which is a unique skill. And you talked about Liz. Liz, she lives and breathes that all day long, so she's expert on that.
And you're looking at things too in that space, because I know you got a couple more, but I want to just interject real quick. Looking at local source generation, right? And then also battery storage. Maybe talk a little bit about those two technologies.
Well, so local source generation. Mostly in our area, solar, but obviously everything's available. Technologically is available. I think the battery is the game changer because all of this stuff is intermittent. I talked about when the wind's not blowing, the sun's not shining, when you're down for maintenance and those kinds of things. If battery technology can give you, we call ride-through capability, so when that stuff is off, you can still be depleting the battery while that comes back, and then you recharge it when it's back, then that's the game changer. So as battery technology comes along, and there's a lot of new things happening in battery technology. We're familiar with some of the regular battery technology that is sodium ion batteries, but there's other types of batteries that are coming available now. And so once that turns the corner, which I think is going to be soon, it'll be a game changer because then a lot of intermittent sources can really be much more valuable than they are today. I think there's a place for community scale of this stuff. So there's a place for on the house. There's a place for in the community that's providing many houses, and there's a place for utility scale that's providing communities. And so we need to make sure we have public policy and regulatory policy that supports all of that stuff. But I think it's fascinating. It's exciting. The technology to me is there. I think we're just working through all the commercial stuff. Yeah. And then again, the appetite for the customer to utilize these things. Yeah. Any
other big things for 2022?
Yeah, I would just say talent is a big deal. I think that given the Great Resignation, as they're calling it these days, people have more options to work places, and so we've got to make sure it's all about the value proposition. What's the value for me working for Duquesne Light versus working somewhere else, or not working at all? Quite frankly, that's an option that some people have as well. So we're trying to bone up on our elevator pitch. If somebody says, what it is that I would get. I think part of what we're talking about is what's exciting about working for Duquesne Light, because you can be in the crosshairs of this critical transformation that's going to, help our children and grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren for many, many years to come. And this is the moment where it's happening. So it's a moment that matters, and you can be a part of it. And that's exciting, and I think that's rewarding and all that sort of stuff. So but making sure that we get the best talent to implement all these exciting new things is a challenge that we're going to continue to focus on, particularly in 2022.
That's awesome. Well, let's leave it at that, because I think that's some hope for the future in terms of both the region and the challenge we have, but also kind of the opportunities that Duquesne Light provides is not just our utility, but also trusted friends and customers here in the region. So we really appreciate the leadership that you're providing, Kevin, and your team, and all the great people at Duquesne Light for keeping the lights on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. We appreciate it.
So thank you so much for listening in here to this episode of The Dirt. Thanks for the team here. Tanner, our new guy in the control seat here. And thank you so much for joining us at the Center for Media Innovation at Point Park University. I'm your host, Grant Ervin, and let's have a great 2022. Take care and have a great day. Thanks.